The young lady sat in the garden and frantically looked at the beautiful flowers with her maid. The little girl said that she found a transparent flower. The maid looked at the lovely flower and said that it could be picked and placed in the girl's room, so that she could fully enjoy his beauty. The young lady looked at him and said that she already had many beautiful things, so she would be very sorry if she blew it up out of greed. She sincerely did not want to destroy such a lovely flower. She wanted to enjoy its beauty in the garden. The maid looked at her and thought she was a very sweet girl. She later said that the flower fairy would have been touched by her words. She admired the little lady's kindness. Unexpectedly for the young lady, an unusual glow appeared near the flower. Sweet Princess Isabel was very happy about the luminous ball, which was heading straight into her hands. She didn't understand what was happening, but she really liked the soft glow emanating from the beautiful flower. The man screamed furiously and called for his wife. She hurriedly ran towards him. The man expected a very important guest to come to him, and his wife did not even deign to prepare for the guest's arrival. The young lady said that she heard that the guest would be arriving towards sunset, so she decided to do some gardening. The man was angry because she believed that in other kingdoms, princesses could look after the garden, but in his empire, he was sure that such work was for a gardener and not for the count's wife. Isabel was very upset because she knew that her husband was not going to hire a gardener, and she was very sorry that no one was looking after the garden. She wanted to be useful and look after a corner of her happiness. She enjoyed spending her time in the garden. The small island country is surrounded by sea. The kingdom of Rune, a place where it was always filled with the lively energy of its inhabitants and the smiles of children, the streets were very peaceful. However, this world disappeared with the invasion of the Eternity Empire. The king of Rune Lakes, not seeing the smell of blood, experienced great bewilderment from this invasion, and only the last favor of the emperor can be considered a success. If they had obediently admitted defeat, then there would be no more victims among the inhabitants of the Rune Kingdom. Prince Natil was to join the Imperial Order of Knighthood, and Princess Isabel was to become engaged to a noble lord chosen by the emperor. The prince and princess wasted no time in thinking and accepted the offer. As promised, the inhabitants of the Kingdom of Rune no longer shed their blood. Isabel was lost in her thoughts. Her husband pulled her out of her thoughts. He began to shout because he was unhappy that she did not listen to him and the Marquis. He regarded her inattention as an insult to the guest. The Marquis provided information related to the treaty regarding the moon rocks. He gave her the scroll and asked her to read it so that she could express her opinion. He wanted to know her opinion and also wanted to test the princess's knowledge. The girl was confused, since the language of the kingdom and the empire sounds the same, but is written differently. She had already lived in the count's house for a year, but she had never seen a simple home teacher who could help her with learning writing. And the whole text that the girl saw was very difficult for her, since he had only terms. Isabel looked at it and realized that it said that the Ballon mine was producing far fewer moon rocks than planned. She was pleased that she could understand the context. She did not want to show her weaknesses in front of her guest and husband. The Marquis looked at her and nodded in agreement. Unfortunately, they could not foresee such a situation at the time of concluding the contract. Therefore, he would like to correct the information somewhat, but first, listen to the opinions of those present. He said that there were points written below for correction and wanted her to read them. The young girl was very surprised, since she saw only professional terms and could not understand what was said there. It was very difficult for her to concentrate and understand what was written. The man looked at the confused girl with a satisfied grin and asked for forgiveness. He said that the countess seemed to have difficulty reading the imperial script. He was glad that in this way he could humiliate her. After the evening meal, there was a quarrel between the spouses. The man was furiously angry with his wife. The man believed that his wife showed him in an indecent light. He screamed and threw things at her. Young Isabel was shocked by her husband's reaction. When he threw various objects at her, he injured her. The girl stood there, confused, and blood flowed down her cheek. Every day she thought about how she could escape from the estate. Isabel was trembling, but she couldn't do anything. Isabel knew that if only she were not the princess of the kingdom, and if she had not made a promise to the emperor, she would be able to escape. But, unfortunately, she had no choice. She had to endure all the torment and bullying from her husband. The girl looked at herself in the mirror and realized that her wound on her cheek had become very rough. She knew she would have a scar for the rest of her life. The Count did not send her outside, and gradually she herself became a recluse. Because I didn't want to show my ugly face to anyone. The Count received the letter and laughed furiously at its contents. Isabel was confused and asked what happened. He looked at her with a grin and said that her brother died on the battlefield. It amused him that he could easily hurt her. Young Isabel couldn't believe his words. She was furious and screamed that her brother could not die so easily. The Count was confused and at a loss. He didn't understand how a woman who couldn't even read properly could raise her voice at him. Her behavior caused his shock, which grew into anger towards her. The girl was shocked by his words. The Count was angry with her and did not understand how she dared to look at him with such a look. He knew that she was offended that he treated her like that, but he liked to treat her this way. The girl, bowing deeply and with tears in her eyes, frantically asked the Count to tell him where her brother's body was sent. The Count looked at her with contempt and said that he would not tell her anything. The Count looked at his wife and said that she was born a princess, and she was sad and offended, but she should still look at everything with gratitude. He didn't know what use she was. He thought that treating her well was too much generosity towards her. While the husband was shouting at his wife, she heard a voice in her head. The girl was overcome by fear. She didn't understand what was happening. She was scared and in pain. Her heart was breaking at the thought that she had lost her brother forever. The Count was in shock and shouted at her not to dare to feign illness, because he won't believe her. He didn't like unnecessary pretense. Poor Isabel screamed in her mind that she missed her father and mother. She desperately wanted to return to a time when there was peace and tranquility. Suddenly, like magic, a voice in her head said to get rid of everyone who hurt her. And in an instant, her husband disappeared. She never saw her husband again. The young girl woke up and screamed furiously. The maid approached her and began to calm her down. The young lady rushed to her maid. She was shaking and crying. The maid kept calming her down. She wanted to comfort the frightened child. The maid reassured the girl and said that everything would be fine. She didn't understand her upset feelings. She lovingly and warmly asked why Isabel was trembling so much. Rita was a kind nurse, whom young Isabel missed very much. Young Isabel watched from the window. After all, every day she looked out the window at her empire, until another empire joined them. She was saddened that things had turned out this way. She looked at the reflection of her face and was perplexed, since there was no scar on it yet. She didn't know what happened, but she was very glad that she found herself in this place. After everything the girl saw and learned, she felt dizzy. She lost consciousness and fell to the floor. Soon the father came to the young princess. He was very worried about the girl. Isabel was very happy to see him. She ran into his arms in tears. The man was at a loss. He didn't understand what could have frightened his daughter so much. A moment later, her brother entered their room. He was very worried about his sister. For a moment, the girl remembered her husband's words that her brother had died. She was very glad to see him and ran up to her brother at full speed. She was very glad that everything was fine with him. The girl was not shy about her emotions. She ran up to him and hugged her brother. He was a little confused. Isabel frantically asked her brother to forgive her for everything. The young man did not understand what happened to his sister. "Sir, ask for the services of a nurse to take care of Isabel." Rita told her master that she would definitely take care of his daughter too, and he need not worry about anything. After all, she loved the girl like her own, and I wanted to do everything in my power for her. The nurse and the princess were left alone in the room. Rita asked the young girl how she was feeling and offered her some soup. The young princess was very happy that she could taste the soup from her childhood. She was very pleased and thanked her breadwinner. After all, for a moment, she was able to return to a carefree childhood. After the meal, Rita asked the young princess what dream she had and if she could tell her. Rita sincerely wanted to help the girl. She wanted to help the girl and relieve her of sadness and grief. Isabel hesitated, but nevertheless began to tell the story. The story took some time, but Isabel gradually told Rita her nightmare. The young princess was a little upset and asked the nurse whether she should believe her or not. While telling the dream, the girl seemed to be returning to the past. For a moment, everything seemed to her like complete nonsense. Rita looked at her and said in a gentle voice that she would believe everything the girl said. She knew that this was all true, as well as the fact that the princess was born on a warm spring day. and when the princess cried for the first time, the wind rose from the flower petals. The petals that entered the room seemed to dance. It was a very surprising and truly beautiful sight. It seemed as if flowers were congratulating a princess on the birth. Isabel looked at Rita and said she didn't deserve to be treated that way. The nurse, in turn, took the girl by the hand and said that everyone loved her and asked her not to forget about it. Young Isabel was very touched by the maid's words and thanked her for her warmth and care. Rita looked at her princess and said that a fairy must have helped her. She didn't know whether it was a dream or the future, but in any case, she returned from that terrible place. She didn't want to live in that nightmare anymore. Young Isabel wanted to forget everything as quickly as possible. Depressed, Isabel heard all the words through a veil of tears, so she did not remember thoroughly, but she was sure that she heard some words. She didn't know whether it was the fairy or someone else, but she returned from that place. So she prayed and asked that her future would not be so terrible again. But the quiet days did not last long. A servant burst into the office where Isabel and her father were. He said he had urgent reports. The servant was very excited and frightened. The man said that the Eternity Empire declared war on them. When Isabel heard this, her world turned upside down. She knew that the same fate awaited her. Dark clouds of chaos hang over the small kingdom, where peace has always reigned. The young prince found it difficult to look at his father's serious expression. He knew that he would have to join the knightly order of the empire. Young Isabel knew that she must marry an imperial nobleman, and the people of the kingdom would no longer have to shed their blood. She would like to tell her father what she knows, since she remembered all the conditions. But she couldn't say anything. Soon her brother joined the knightly order of the empire, and she knew that she would marry an aristocrat from the empire. But, unfortunately, this was the path of grief and misfortune, and not universal salvation. She knew that she had to prevent such a future, but she was confused because she did not know what to do and what to do. Young Isabel wanted to try to convince her father, but unfortunately, nothing worked out for her. Everything she tried didn't work, and her time was wasted. The young girl knew she had 1 month left, and she knew she had to change something. Lost in her thoughts, she accidentally came across a young man. When the girl saw him, she was a little embarrassed, since it was the first time she had seen him. She did not understand why the imperial person was leaving the audience hall. He saw her look and jokingly said that from her look, one could clearly understand what she was thinking and what question interested her, namely, what the imperial officials had forgotten here. After an awkward pause, the man said that he had come specifically to see the young princess. The girl was a little excited and surprised that they wanted to see her. She didn't know what the young man wanted to hear from her, but she knew that she had to change her future. She looked at him and asked how he could help her. She desperately wanted to hear all the information from him. The man looked at her with a smile and said that he would definitely tell her everything, but they needed to go to another place. With one wave of his hand, he carried them to the roof. The girl was shocked by this, as she did not expect such magic. The man just smiled and told her to be careful, as she might fall from the roof. Isabel was scared. She didn't understand how they could get to the roof. The man smiled and said that he never introduced himself to her. He said his name was Oz. The man held the position of professor at the Kavala Academy. Kavala Academy is an educational institution located in the capital of the Eternity Empire. It is famous for its students with outstanding abilities, including flight. The young professor looked at Princess Isabel and invited her to go with him to the academy. The girl was puzzled by his words, as she heard that only gifted students can get there. The man said that, in fact, he came to her because of the huge flow of mana. It was from her that the flow came. Oz believed that the girl was full of talent. Young Isabel was shocked because she did not expect that she had any abilities. She heard that the Emperor himself gives the academy graduates the title. She was confused because she could still change her future. The girl was very pleased with his words, but also horrified. Because she knew that she had to get married, and also that she did not belong to the people of the empire. She was confused and did not understand why. He invites her to join the academy, despite all the nuances. The professor looked at the young talent and said that His Majesty really values talents, and if he was, then the girl would definitely be recommended and enrolled in the academy, regardless of her status and origin. The professor looked at the young lady and said that she definitely had talent, and the only question was whether she wanted to join the academy or not. The girl blossomed before our eyes. She said that she really wanted to join the academy. She knew that in this way she could change her future and her family. The professor was very happy with her decision and said that he would personally recommend her to the academy. The young princess was very happy, but she was also interested in why he wanted her to enter the academy. The man hesitated, but a moment later he said that there was a man who really wanted to see her, but he could not say anything more. He took his leave and left her. The professor returned the girl back to the castle. Isabel was surprised when her father saw her as soon as she went down into the room. The man was confused. He did not understand what happened to her. Isabel calmed him down and said everything was fine. The man apologized to his daughter for neglecting her recently as he was busy with government affairs. 3 months later, the entrance ceremony to the academy took place. All the young students were whispering and were very happy to enter the academy. The young people whispered furiously because they knew that they would act together with His Majesty. Second Prince of the Internet Empire, Chris Eternity, young Isabel approached the young man and asked if he was free. The young man was surprised, but said with a smile that she could sit down next to him. The girl thanked the young man. The young prince looked at the girl. They did not speak. But all the aristocrats always wanted to talk to him. They tried to establish a connection with him during admission, to line up. But the young princess spoke to him even before the ceremony began. He looked at her and realized that she was a completely unusual person. The prince believed that she was not because of the higher nobility. The young prince thought that the girl was attracted to him because of his family. He knew that if she spoke to him, he would have to answer. Young Isabel said nothing and silently examined the documents. He didn't understand why she was still silent. Since about half an hour had already passed, and she didn't even try to talk to him, young Isabel sat and studied the admissions manual. The prince looked at her and understood that she was trying to attract attention to herself, but not like everyone else. One of the directors of the academy congratulated the students on their admission. The young Prince of Art looked out and looked at the girl. She definitely interested him. The prince forbade himself to look at her and pay close attention. The woman said that this year the doors of the academy are open not only to applicants from the empire, but also to many talented people from all over the continent. She was pleased to introduce the 2 people who had the honor of receiving certificates. Everyone sat in anticipation and did not know who would be called. The young prince was waiting for his name to be called. He knew he needed to get up and greet the crowd. But the head of the academy called Isabel's name because they wanted to greet her. The young beauty Isabel hurriedly went to the leader, and the amazed prince stood and looked after her. Isabel was presented with a certificate. She was very happy because she had worked hard. Bring was also given a certificate. He knew that even if he didn't try to work, he would have everything he wanted. He had no doubt that this would continue, but when he saw the silver certificate for second place, he was seriously excited. The prince noticed Isabel. Their gazes crossed. He was glad about this, because before the girl simply did not notice him. But suddenly, unexpectedly for him, the girl turned around and left. He was in shock and did not understand what had happened. In the morning, a letter arrived from Isabel. The young princess wrote a letter after the end of the entrance ceremony. Because thanks to her hard work, she was accepted into the academy as the best student, and she immediately wanted to share this news with her brother. The girl also wrote about her experiences. The young princess was very afraid of the coming future, but she knew that she could cope just as well. The young girl especially wanted to know how her brother and also her father were doing. Isabel sincerely hoped that her brother always put his own safety first. She prayed fervently every day for his health. Isabel was a child who became the meaning of life for her brother after the death of her mother. Their mother died of a serious illness just a few years after birth. Before her death, she begged her son to look after his sister. The young man wanted to make her happy and protect her from all adversities, so when his sister started talking about studying abroad, he was both surprised and concerned, since the girls were given difficult work. The young man was sincerely proud of his sister, since she was now the best student at the academy. He knew their mother would be very happy for her. The young man was called to morning training. He left the letter in a hurry and went to train. On the way, he kept thinking about his sister. He didn't want her to suffer and hoped to do everything so that she would live a good life. The young man knew that he would soon become a real knight and would be able to protect her. The young prince was sitting in the library and studying books. But besides this, he remembered the young red-haired beauty who had surpassed him in studies. The girl slipped because she didn't expect it to be very slippery. She thought there was something wrong with the floor-cleaning liquid. The young prince froze. He could not answer. Young Isabel not only became a better student, but also took a place in the admissions competition. And she received the best education from the most famous professors, and she also learned how to properly get out of difficult situations and incomprehensible situations. The young prince thought that perhaps the kingdom of Rune had special methods for raising talented people. He desperately wanted to find all the information about the girl. The young prince's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a young man. He looked at the prince with a smile and said that he was sitting in the library reading books and had not even managed to enter the academy. The prince told him with a grin that if he had not been an old friend, he would have already been in custody for showing disrespect towards him. The young man thanked the prince for his efforts. The prince was at a loss as the young man came to the library, without attending the ceremony itself. The young man said that the library is the quietest place. Esker Mua is the owner of the tower and the only son of the great sorcerer of the empire. He is also a freshman who attracts enough attention to be friends with the prince. Unfortunately, the young man was almost forced to enter the academy, and therefore he was always ready to run away. The prince was a little upset because he knew the class distribution, and they were in different classes. The prince said that the young man was in the lower class. The young man noticed that the prince seemed to like the young red-haired princess. Esker was interested in the fact that they could be together. He thought it was quite interesting. The prince was furious. He did not understand where he got such information from if he was not even at the ceremony. The young man said that he had his own sources of information, and especially the prince, whom he knew did not like to study, much less read about all sorts of provincial states. The upset prince said that the girl became the best in the class, and he took second place. So he became interested. Isabel memorized all her schedule and the location of the rooms in the building. She also collected everything necessary for classes. She knew it was time for her to get ready for her lessons. The young lady turned around and saw the prince surrounded by his classmates. They smiled and asked if he had chosen an elective. He talked to everyone with a smile. He said that he was still thinking about the choice of electives. Isabel looked at the young prince for a moment. She thought he was from another world. Isabel once saw the second prince. Then he was very different from the one she sees now. Among the imperial family, her husband the count hated the second prince. According to the count, he was a very calculating person and equally careless, capable of throwing away everything and everyone he considered useless. And in contrast to what was said, everyone else considered him an ideal, who illuminated everything around with his presence alone. Isabel remembered the cold gaze that touched, unable to forgive even the slightest mistake. That look was still in her memory, but now she saw a completely different person. She did not understand how the current prince differed from the past. She didn't know if her husband was lying or if everything was true, but she knew that something would change him in the future. Isabel decided not to think about anything and focus on her studies, as her goal was to become the best graduate. Isabel was greeted by her class teacher and the professor of applied magic. He was interested in her progress and also decided to test the knowledge of the young girl. The young princess easily answered all the teacher's questions, and he was very pleased with her knowledge. Oz would be her leader. She was very happy. Because I was able to meet a familiar face at the academy. Applied magic was not an exact science, so the subject is for those who do not have magical abilities, and since it was very difficult, she taught it with great diligence. The professor said that magic is equal to cooking, since the basis of the latter is ingredients. The magic formula is a kind of ingredient. If you take the right components, you can move on to the main process. The professor asked Isabel questions. After several correct answers, the girl hesitated and did not know the answer to the last question. A young man came up to them and answered for her, after which he sat down at his desk and said that everyone said that she was the best student. He was very glad that the girl had overtaken the prince himself, and with a grin asked if she liked the prince. Their awkward conversation was disturbed by the professor. He said that during the lesson, there was no place for extraneous conversations. The professor was confident that a simple greeting at lunch or during a break would be sufficient. The professor asked the young man if he would like to listen to the lecture or maybe he would prefer something else. Esker said in a frustrated voice that he would listen to the lecture. The professor was pleased. Young Isabel did not understand why the boy was behaving so strangely, and why he was communicating with the professor in such a way. She looked at him. The white hair and red eyes stood out from everyone else, and it was hard to take your eyes off the boy who looked like a rabbit. Esker looked at the red-haired princess and said that she was very cute. Isabel was at a loss. She said she was going to go have lunch. The young man looked at her and said that they could go together. Isabel was walking with a new friend to lunch, and was confused because none of the foreigners approached her first. In their class, all attention was focused on the young prince, and she, as the best student, can only be asked for lesson materials. Therefore, wherever Isabel went, to class or to lunch or to the library, she was always alone. Esker said that the professor has a talent for complicating simple things, which is why he is not very popular. Isabel was a little surprised and said that it seemed to her that the professor was very popular, since girls followed him in droves. The young man looked at her with a grin and said that in his lessons, everyone was like sleepy flies. But I noticed that this, of course, is not about them. Isabel asked her friend how he knew her. She realized that he knew all the information about her in advance. Unexpectedly, the prince approached them. Young Isabel was frightened by such an unexpected appearance. The results of the study showed that there are no special methods for nurturing talented people in the kingdom. The more the prince delved, the more convinced he became that the young princess came from a very small and weak country. However, after several days of being in the same class, the prince realized that she was different from other children, and finally he knew the answer to his question. Most of the children always walked along the path already paved by their families and went to the academy in order to spend time easily and carefree, but the young lady did not pay attention to status and did not flatter anyone. Isabel was at times faced with a difficult task, but did not give up until she completed it. But some students even whispered that she took first place with the help of some trick. But the prince knew that this could not happen. The girl tried harder than anyone. The prince was always flying in the clouds, as his thoughts were far beyond the academy. He kept thinking about the young princess, when suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by his friend. He wanted to know if the prince had chosen basic fencing as his major. The young man was very glad that the prince would join the fencing club, since the first prince also once studied at the academy. The prince was born and raised in the imperial family, so he already has a certain skill. He chose fencing because he wanted to get the highest grade, and even if he counted crows in class, he would still get good grades. The princess chose applied magic as her faculty. But unfortunately, it was a notorious subject that everyone avoided. There were no wizards in her kingdom, so it would be very difficult for her due to the lack of skills and information. But Isabel did not want to give up and was not going to avoid difficulties. Princip was born the son of the emperor himself, so he studied fencing from the age of 6. He knew that he would do well in everything if he took fencing lessons. But he was always told that in order to become an outstanding emperor, you need to train not your strengths, but get rid of your shortcomings. The fencing teacher said that if he likes fencing classes. But the young prince did not have time to let the teacher finish his sentence, and said that the sword had always been a part of him and his life, so he would like to challenge something new. Considering the application for choosing a faculty, the young prince chose the subject of applied magic. He hesitated a little, since the academy has a lot of simple and fun activities. He decided not to give up, since there was nothing that could scare him. But he knew he couldn't just run away. He wanted to have a fair fight for the honorable first place. Isabel saw the prince and was surprised. Her new blonde friend looked at the prince with surprise. He did not understand what brought him to study such a complex subject. The principal was at a loss, and did not expect to see his old friend next to Isabel. Isabel was sitting and eating her sandwich when her new friend came up to her and said that he also wanted to try it. Without thinking twice, the girl broke the sandwich in half and gave the other half to her friend. The prince was surprised and did not understand when they became so close. Isabel was surprised by this question and said that they go to the same classes. The prince said that they were taking classes in applied magic. Isabel was surprised and asked how he knew that they were dedicating such a subject. The prince smiled and said that she was the best student and would choose the most difficult subject. The prince smiled and said that it was very good that the girl chose such a subject, since he also chose this course. The young people were perplexed and did not understand why the prince decided to study such a complex subject. The young man knew that knights held only a sword in their hands all their lives and did not choose magic. He was perplexed by the prince's action. The prince said with a smile that these are professors, and his academic discipline is also held in high esteem by the imperial family. So, it would be a waste of time to go all the way to the academy and not attend the lessons of a famous professor. Chris looked at Isabel and asked her to contact him without formalities. Since he was at the academy, he was not a prince, but just an ordinary student. The professor was very glad that the second prince of the empire, the only son of the great sorcerer of the empire, and the best student among the first-year students of the academy, was present in his classes. Isabel's work and said that she had easily found the missing part of the formula. He asked her if she remembered what he said. Isabel was a little nervous, but mentally told herself to calm down, and everything would work out for her. Isabel knew she could do it, and she just needed to focus. Isabel concentrated and began to complete the task. The professor looked at her and said that everything worked out for her, and she called a cute rabbit. He claimed that the magic of creating something from nothing was still impossible for her, but the summoning magic she used was completely different. The professor smiled and congratulated the young lady on her success. He looked at her and asked if she would take the little rabbit with her. Isabel said she would pick it up. Esker said it was moments like these that made him reluctant to take Oz's classes. The young prince said that he need not listen to him at all. He wondered what kind of magic could make Esker sit quietly in class. Esker was a little surprised and asked the prince what brought him to magic lessons. Since he was sure that the prince was not interested in them, young Isabel interrupted their conversation and thanked Esker. She said he encouraged her before she cast the spell correctly. Esker looked at her and understood that she was very nervous then. He knew that if she continued to worry, it would not lead to anything good. And besides, he was worried about something. He knew that an ordinary magician simply used mana. A magician of the highest ranks can feel it, and a great sorcerer can see it with his own eyes. Even though he was the son of the great sorcerer and could see mana in childhood, he saw the mana of a red flower for the first time. Mana obtained from the energy of the world tree is usually blue. In books, although very rarely, the existence of red mana was mentioned. But in fact, he only met blue mana. Even the great sorcerer had blue mana, but Isabel was red for some reason. Isabel called out to the young man, breaking him from his thoughts. The girl said that her image was frozen in her head, and she thought that because of this, he turned out to be such an adorable rabbit. Isabel showed Esker the rabbit closer. He was surprised. Isabel was very happy, and said with a smile that the rabbit was very similar to the young man. The young people were at a loss. The prince did not understand how a rabbit could look like Esker. Isabel said that they were very similar as the rabbit was white and had red eyes. The prince laughed furiously and said that the rabbit really looked like white and red. Esker was at a loss. He didn't understand why he was compared to a rabbit, because he believed that if his image were true, it should have turned out to be a monster. Hesitating, the young man asked if he really looked like a rabbit. Isabel thought she had offended the young guy. She said that in her eyes he looked like a rabbit. They had a nice conversation and decided to go have dinner. Professor Oz was a little puzzled because he couldn't believe that so many students came to him. He almost cried in front of the audience, out of happiness. But looking at the prince, he understood why they all came to him. But still, he was very happy. The young prince looked for Isabel. He couldn't figure out where she had gone. A young lady came up to him and said that she had come to see him about the party they were talking about last time. The prince was confused. The girl said that they wanted to organize a party together. The prince, confused, recalled the previous conversation and said that he remembered everything. But his attention was focused on Isabel, who was talking with Esker. Isabel and Esker were walking. The young man asked why Isabel did not go to dinner. The young princess looked at him and said that today's topic they had in lecture was not easy, and she needed to consolidate the material. He looked at her and asked if she wanted him to help her. Young Isabel drew a spell in runes. With a frightened look, she decided to begin her task. She sincerely wanted to succeed this time, but, unfortunately, failure awaited her. Isabel looked at her friend from the side, and she understood that he would have coped with such a task in no time. She realized this after they met, since he was the son of the great sorcerer. Like the prince, everyone at the academy knew him. He had a talent for magic, so he couldn't understand why girls found magic so difficult. When the young man said that he could help the girl, Isabel hesitated a little, since she knew that he did not like magic. Esker looked at her and asked why she got this idea. Isabel knew that the professor loved magic so much that he used it in everyday life, and even went so far as to turn pages using magic. And Isabel had never seen the young man use it, even in everyday little things. And besides, sometimes during magic lessons, he had a very scary face. Isabel looked at him and said that she would not like to force a person to do something that he did not like. The young man was surprised by this answer and said that in this case, he would simply look from the sidelines and would not help her. Isabel looked at him. His appearance caused her confusion. She did not understand why he simply did not intend to sleep in his room, but decided to sleep under a tree. She knew that it was already quite cool outside. She decided to brush her thoughts aside and not think about it. She needed to focus. She knew she had to try a few more times and push all thoughts away. Looking at the young boy, everyone was surprised that he was able to see mana. People were confused that at such a young age he was capable of any kind of magic. They thought he was a monster. The young man approached his father and said that he did not want to be a sorcerer after everything that he had heard about himself from the lips of other people. The sorcerer was in shock. He did not understand why such a mood suddenly changed. The man frantically wanted to know what the young man could become then. The sorcerer assured him that the young man would still become a magician no matter what. His own mother was always on his side. She supported him in every possible way and told him that he should do what he liked. Esker woke up and did not understand how long he had slept. He saw that he was covered with a jacket and Isabel was sitting next to him. He was surprised that she was still sitting next to him. Isabel said that she really wanted to show him something when he woke up. Young Isabel looked at her friend and said that she had finally managed to conclude a magical contract. The young man was surprised and asked how she did it. Isabel looked at the rabbit in confusion and said that she herself did not understand how this happened. She simply asked him if he would like to enter into a contract with her. The young man was very surprised, because he knew that the magical contract that Isabel used helps to appropriate the summoned living beings. It was simply magic that required only the one-sided application of mana. The young man knew that the girl could not feel mana. The young man hurriedly stood up, gave her the jacket, and told her to take it back. Isabel said that they had to leave and thanked him for being there for her. Esker looked at the rabbit and asked the young girl if she had already given him a name. Isabel hesitated a little and said that she hadn't thought of it yet. He looked at her and asked if she considered a rabbit a pet. The last step in concluding a magical contract was to assign a name to the creature. This was a kind of agreement binding the two. The young man said that if you don't give the creature a name, it might simply run away. Young Isabel was surprised and confused. She did not know what she could call her new friend. Esker didn't understand why he had to teach her everything. Isabel thought for a moment and said that she was calling the rabbit Moo. The young man was surprised. Tak knew that this name was a shortening of his last name. Isabel said that he became her first friend at the academy, and the bunny was her first baby called. The young lady asked in a trembling voice whether he liked the bunny's name or not. She said that if he didn't like it, she could choose a different name. The young man said that she could keep that name for the baby. Isabel looked at the young man and the rabbit for a long time. The more she looked at them, the more she saw the similarities between them. The professor said in a joyful voice that 2 whole months had already come since the beginning of the semester. He said with a smile that next week there would be a party for freshmen and that enrollment in academic clubs would also open. The professor said that to study more detailed information, they could look at the bulletin board in the hall. The young princess looked at the notice board with trepidation. She considered all the vacancies. There was a club for gardeners, fortune tellers, needlework, theology, as well as academic newspapers. There was a lot of things. The girl was a little confused because she didn't know where to go. Young people were sitting on the steps. Isabel said that at the freshman welcome party, each club recruits new members. She wanted to know which one would suit her best. The young man looked at her and asked if it was necessary to choose which club to go to. The princess said that this is a prerequisite for getting extra points. Esker looked at her in bewilderment. He did not understand what she was talking about. Isabel knew that if there was a self-taught club, she would immediately visit it, but it's a pity that there was no such thing. Esker looked at her and asked, how about a magic club? Isabel was a little surprised, because she hadn't seen anything like that on the notice board. The young man said that such a club can only be entered by recommendation, and if she wants to get there, then he can help her. The princess was surprised and asked the young man if he was a member of this club. The young man said that the head of the magic club came to him even before entering the academy and offered to join them. He looked at her with a smile and said that if she wanted, he would be the first to join the club, and then he would recommend her. The girl was amazed because she knew that the young man did not want to join the club. Isabel looked at him and said that she didn't want to force him to do anything he didn't want to do. She thanked him for the offer and said that she would still think about which club to join. The young man was shocked because there were always people around him who did what they wanted just to achieve their goal. Among them, there were those who were ready to sacrifice even their humanity to satisfy their thirst for research. But the girl refused his help every time, and therefore the young man was at a loss. The young wizard looked at the young princess and said that she was truly a unique person. The young student saw the prince and began to whisper. They said he was as beautiful as always. In the academy, extra points are awarded for club activities, so joining and participating in a club is practically necessary. The young prince was sure that Isabel would definitely choose some club for herself, but still he wanted to know where she would join. He knew that the girl had a habit of biting her lip when she was thinking about something in concentration. He knew that she often read a book by the fountain in the garden, and there was a possibility that it would be a book club. The prince also knew that she was interested in needlework. The young prince saw that the girl had problems with her form. Later, classmates noticed that the girl had a rabbit embroidered on her skirt. They said it was very nice. Isabel looked at them and said that she just wanted to try to sew them up herself, as she really liked to do needlework. The prince was shocked and did not understand why she should bother with such trifles. Only then he realized that the girl was a poor foreigner, a student who doesn't even have another copy of the form. He was sure that because of the scholarship she was obsessed with studying. A few days passed, and there was a welcome party for the first years. Everyone met their relatives and were very happy about this moment. The young princess was alone in a crowd of people completely unfamiliar to her. She thought it would be better for her to go to the library since it was much quieter than the noisy crowd. The young princess was sitting alone in the library, along with her rabbit. She knew that she needed to write a letter to her brother. Suddenly, she heard an incomprehensible sound. A cute girl was sitting at the next desk. She wrote something, but nothing worked out for her. Young Isabel didn't even notice that someone was sitting next to her. She thought that no one but her would come to the library on such a day. She noticed her beautiful ties and thought she was a senior student. The girl turned to young Isabel. She asked her not to move for just 1 minute. Young Isabel was at a loss, but agreed to her demands. The girl was very happy and satisfied, shouting that she had succeeded and that she could do it. She approached Isabel, thanked her, because thanks to her, she was able to finish her skit. Isabel again. The young princess also introduced herself to her new friend. Joy was surprised and asked her if she was the same girl who entered the academy with the highest score. The girl said that in fact, she was just writing a play about a princess. Joy said that as soon as their eyes met, she felt like she had known all her life. Isabel, the young princess, looked at Joy with bewilderment. In order to dispel the situation, Joy asked Isabel decided which club to join. Isabel said that she had not decided yet, but was just thinking about it. Joy asked if she had any options in mind. The young princess said that at the moment she was thinking about a crafts club or a book club. Since she didn't think she could get into the magic club, Joy heard everything Isabel said and asked her if she would like to choose a performing arts club. Isabel thought about her words, but she also said that she had never played before and did not know what to do. She thought she wouldn't be very useful in class. Joy reassured her and told her that she had nothing to worry about as it was very simple. Since the theater club does not imply only pure acting, they prepared the scenery, costumes, props, and also wrote scripts. Joy said it's a very entertaining club and it's a lot of fun because you can do different things. But first of all, the advantage of the theater arts club is that you can easily get extra points there, regardless of what kind of work you do. Isabel walked along with her friend. He looked at her and asked with bewilderment if she had decided to join the theater club. The young lady said with a smile that she had decided to go there after all. The prince said he joined the craft club because he developed an interest in something he had not done before. The prince was sure that this type of activity was closely intertwined with everyday life, be it embroidery or making clothes. He thought that as an emperor, he would need such knowledge. Esker knew that now he would have a reason to mock the prince, since he knew where the young princess had entered. Isabel looked at her friend and asked why with her and not with her family. She knew that the academy was strictly guarded, and the entry of outsiders was strictly prohibited, since there was a dormitory on the territory and the doors of the academy were rarely opened. But on days like this, students' families may come without special invitation, so she thought that Esker's relatives would also come. The young man answered upset that no one came to him because his father hated him and his mother died. The girl was upset after such words and apologized to the young man. Esker said that everything was fine and it would be convenient for both of them to know information about each other in advance, because they were friends after all. He looked at her and said with a smile that if she didn't have any plans, they could take a walk together. Young Isabel apologized to her friend, but said that she could not go because she had a lecture soon and she needed to go to the classroom. Esker was surprised because he knew that they had no classes today. Isabel said that one of the academy graduates came to teach a class today, and on the notice board there were names of students who absolutely had to come, since it was like an extra class. Esker was surprised. He did not understand what additional classes the best freshman could have. Isabel looked at him and said that it was probably because she was an international student. The girl looked at the young man and asked if he wanted to go with her. Esker was at a loss, but he thought that in this way he could annoy the prince and told her that he would go with her. There was a slightly depressed atmosphere in the audience. Isabel looked at everyone and realized that there were no people from famous families in the audience. The 26th graduate of the academy came into the classroom and said that he would give them a lecture. Isabel was furiously frightened and surprised, since the man was from her past life. It was Count Valen, her husband. The man greeted everyone with a smile. The girl looked at the man with frightened eyes and realized that the reason why she entered the academy was right in front of her. The Count looked at all the students and said that he was teaching classes and knew how difficult their learning path was, and since he was much older than them, he wanted to help them a little in their studies, since they were in the same empire. Isabel expected that they would definitely meet at least once, but she didn't think it would happen so spontaneously. The Count walked around the audience and handed out sheets to test knowledge. He approached one young lady and gave her a piece of paper with the task, and he also asked if she could read the task out loud for everyone to hear. The girl began to read the information in a trembling voice. The young girl read the information, her voice trembled, and she was a little confused. The Count corrected the young lady with impatience in his voice. He angrily tore the piece of paper out of her hands because he could no longer tolerate the way she was reading. He said that previously, to enter the academy, one had to pass a very difficult exam, since the reputation was high and people with low knowledge could not get into the academy. The Count shouted that at the moment the academy was accepting just anyone. He could not believe that among the students there were those who could not read normally. Isabel sat and listened to his statement. She remembered the day when she couldn't read the information. The Count shouted furiously that he was disappointed in her and all the students. He said that such reading was a shame, both for him and for everyone. The Count walked around the audience and looked at everyone present with contempt. With anger in his voice, he asked if anyone could properly read the information he was giving. Esker looked at him, and hatred arose in him towards the Count. He planned to just watch, but given the man's tone, he wanted to turn the entire audience over. Unexpectedly, Isabel raised her hand and said that she wanted to read the information. Isabel read the information on the sheet without hesitation or error. The Count looked at her intently and thought that the young lady from an aristocratic family had wandered into the academy by mistake. But apparently, this was not the case. The young lady read the text and thought a little. The Count asked her if it was difficult for her to read. But Isabel found an error in the text and asked if she thought correctly. Isabel pointed out a specific error in the dates. The Count looked at her angrily and did not understand how an ordinary student could know such information. He said with anger in his voice that she was very erudite. The Count knew that even among the nobility it is rare to meet people who know true history. He grinned and looked at her and asked what her name was. Isabel looked at him with all her courage and introduced herself. She decided not to give up and defeat him no matter the cost. The Count looked at her and realized that she was a princess from the Kingdom of Rune. The Kingdom of Rune was a small island state with an area even smaller than its possessions, and after the kingdom lost in an unequal war, it was annexed to the empire. And when negotiations about marriage with the princess of the Kingdom of Rune stopped, the count was very happy. He didn't even think that he could meet her at the academy. The count looked at the young girl with contempt and knew that she came from a remote kingdom. He knew that the girl spent a lot of time reading books, but if you dig a little deeper, you can reveal her rustic nature. He looked at her with contempt and asked several questions. The girl answered all his questions, but the count saw some shortcomings in the answers and decided to correct her. The girl hesitated because she knew that the count was wrong, and a moment later, she proved him wrong. He was shocked that he had made a mistake. Esker watched everything that was happening from the side, and with a smile, thought that the count had made himself look stupid. The count saw that the young girl really knew a lot of things, and he decided to bombard her with questions. But the young lady was not at a loss and gave an answer to every question. The count was furiously angry with the young excellent student and did not understand how she could know so much. Isabel looked at him and said that the academy provides equal educational opportunities regardless of the student's status and background. So, thanks to this opportunity, she and other children can learn a lot. Isabel looked at the count and said that it seemed that the situation was very different during his training at the academy. The count was shocked and very angry that he lost to the young princess. He said that he had taken up too much of the students' time and said goodbye to them. He immediately left the audience. A young girl approached Isabel and introduced herself as Miss Roth. The girl thanked Isabel for what she did at the lecture today. The girl said that everyone had already noticed that she was a commoner, so she did not have a surname, but only a first name. However, she worked hard to get into the academy. But in such cases, she did not know how to behave. Having told her story, the girl once again thanked Isabel for everything that was happening in the audience and for her help. Esker saw his friend and called her. He knew that a ray of light seemed to emanate from her, and looking at her, he understood that the girl did not need anyone else's help. He said, with a smile, that he didn't want anything and said goodbye to her. One of the women who worked at the academy met Isabel and said that she had received a letter, and she also said that the young lady was coming back very late and one day she might get into trouble. Isabel sat and carefully read the letter her brother wrote to her. He wrote that he was very glad that she was doing well, and he also talked about his training. He asked her if she would come to the training base during the summer holidays because he desperately wanted to prepare for their meeting and was looking forward to the meeting. He also wrote that if she had any difficulties or worries, he would definitely listen to them and help her in everything. Isabel read the letter and was very glad that her brother was doing well. She was very bored and wanted to meet him as soon as possible. She wanted to share everything that was on her soul. Isabel felt a little lonely when she watched other families. But after reading the letter, harmony and peace reigned in her soul, because she knew that regardless of the distance, their hearts were united. She was looking forward to the holidays and their meeting. The next day, young Isabel woke up earlier than usual. She walked along the corridors of the academy and hummed a cheerful song. She knew she had a world history class in the afternoon, so she wanted to prepare in advance. Unexpectedly for her, the prince came out of the office into the corridor and greeted her. The prince looked at her and asked if she always comes so early to class. The princess said that he also came earlier today. The prince said with a smile that he simply woke up early and decided to prepare for classes in advance. Isabel always addressed the prince as you. The young man was very upset and did not want her to stop addressing him like that. Wherever the prince went, people tried to talk to him, so he didn't know where it was best for him to start a conversation with the person who was in front of him. He never had to ask his interlocutor about anything, and especially, he never had to ask what his interlocutor was thinking about, since he had never been interested in this before. However, looking at the young girl, he has various problems. He knew that from the very beginning she was not interested in status, nor in his power and money. Isabel looked at the prince and asked if anything had been bothering him these days. The young man hesitated. I didn't know what to answer. He didn't understand why she was suddenly asking such a thing. He hoped she was worried about him. He looked at her and said that he was fine and wanted to know why it was asking this. Isabel looked away and said that she always thought that it was never easy for a person to occupy the place of the prince of the empire. The prince looked up and said that she was also the princess of her kingdom, and she was also properly aware of the weight of power. He asked her with a smile and asked if that was why she was asking him. He was glad that they had something in common. He also thanked her for her concern. He said with a smile that everything was fine with him now and there were no difficulties. Isabel looked at him and asked who he cared about. The prince was surprised by such a question. He did not understand what she meant by her question. He wanted to give her an answer even to her question, but suddenly classmates came to their class. He said hastily that he didn't think there was anyone who cared about him. The princess looked at the prince and thanked him for the early conversation. She said he made her have fun. He answered her with a smile that he also had a lot of fun. He hoped that soon they would have time to have a normal conversation again. Looking at her, he did not understand why she asked him such questions. He wanted to know what she was thinking about now. Isabel was very glad that other students approached them, since the current Chris was straightforward and gentle, like a prince from a fairy tale. But the prince she saw before was a completely different person. Looking at the young guys, she understood that their friendship was real, since earlier she believed that their friendship was only acting. But now, Isabel knew that this was not the case at all, but Isabel was also perplexed by what could change the principal so much in the future. In addition, she believed that there was still someone who was bothering him. Isabel knew that if she could get close to him, she would probably find out the reason why he had changed so much. Her thoughts were interrupted by the first lesson of the afternoon, which was world history in world history. There was a lot of information, so Isabel knew that she had to carefully consolidate everything. The teacher told the history of the continent, namely that in the center of the continent there is a world tree. Many kingdoms are located around this tree, and among all of them, only Eterenti has the right to be called an empire, to whom the tree belonged to this day. In order to preserve the great right, the empire makes great efforts for the prosperity of the country. An example of the country's prosperity is the war that began 3 years ago and continues to this day. Thanks to the war, the empire annexed other kingdoms. The young girl knew that the immortality of the empire meant the destruction of other countries. The teacher said that many kingdoms, including the kingdom of Rune, instead of being completely subjugated, received the right to education in the empire, technology, and many other privileges. Isabel felt the prickly glances of students who, on ordinary days, were not interested in her. She knew that everything would end soon, and she needed to be patient a little longer. The prince decided to stand up for his young friend. He told the professor that there were foreign students in their class. Young Isabel was surprised, since this was the first time she felt that all prices met the prince's gaze. In the next lesson, Professor Oz told all the information about the magic regents and asked to prepare one of the magic regents yourself for the next week. The students were at a loss, but the professor said that they would not even need manna to make it if the recipe and ingredients were correct and in the right proportions. The professor said that they could find the manufacturing method in textbooks or in the library, and they could find the ingredients in the laboratory or in the parish magic garden. He also added that the resulting product will affect their final score. Esker came to class. The professor was at a loss. He did not understand why the young man came to their classes. Esker looked at him and said that he had come to listen to the lesson, even if it was late. Esker and Isabel sat and discussed the past lesson. Isabel said that she was going to start the task today. She looked at the young man and asked which recipe was best. The young man looked intently at his girlfriend and could not stop admiring her, since the color of her mana was very unique and mesmerizing. This made it difficult for him to take his eyes off her. He wanted to know more about her. The young man did not understand how the girl managed to get the attention of the narcissistic prince immediately after entering the academy. He knew that absolutely all the magic around him was exclusively blue mana. But it was the girl who was different, despite the complete lack of experience, and the girl had a lot of knowledge about magic. Esker looked up at the sky, looking away from his girlfriend, and said that there are many types of magic regents, just like there are types in magic. The young man asked Isabel, has she had any difficulties or worries lately? Isabel was very surprised by this question, since she asked the same question to the prince. Isabel looked at her friend and said that she had no worries and was fine. She was wondering why he suddenly asked such a question. The young man looked at her and said with a smile that it just occurred to him, and he decided to ask her. Isabel looked at him and asked if there was something that was bothering him or someone. Esker was shocked. He looked at her in bewilderment and asked if she really wasn't worried. Isabel looked at him and said that she was worried about him, since he had never had much interest in his lessons, but lately he had not been visible at all in class. She knew that at this rate he could fail the exam and then face expulsion. Isabel was upset by his words. She said that he didn't care, but she would be very sad if he was expelled. The young man was surprised. He did not expect such an answer from her. The man shouted furiously at the boy, as he was very worried about him. He shouted that all this time, many wizards had been looking for him. He knew that no matter how talented the boy was, he should not abuse the magic of concealment. He knew that wizards were afraid of him because of his outstanding talent, and his father was constantly angry with him instead of worrying about his child. Only one mother cried furiously and worried about her son. She did not understand what prompted him to hide. Isabel said that she would be very sad without him because he was her first friend whom she met at the academy. Esker realized that he needed to try not to be expelled from the academy. The professor found the young boy and looked at him and said that he had been looking for him for a long time. He wanted to tell him something and asked him to give him some time. Esker knew that there were several reasons why the professor wanted to talk to him. The first was to talk about his academic performance, and the second was related to his father. Esker said he was busy, because I didn't really want to talk to the professor, but the professor was serious and said that he was aware that the young man had nothing to do. The professor shouted after him that his conversation was connected with Isabel. They went to the laboratory to talk in peace and quiet. Esker said that the laboratory was very stuffy, but the professor thought differently. The professor said that he felt as if only yesterday everyone was preparing for the entrance exams to the academy, and so much time had already passed. He believed that time flies very quickly. The young man could not stand it, and told the professor that he did not need to beat around the bush, and asked him to get to the heart of the conversation. He did not want long conversations, and hoped to leave the professor soon. The professor looked at the young man and said that recently he could feel a huge wave of mana, and it was quite possible that its source was Miss Isabel. Esker looked at the professor and said that he knew about everything, and had recently been able to verify for himself that a large flow of mana was emanating from the girl. The professor was surprised. Before the academy's entrance ceremony, Esker made a surprise visit to Oz. He felt a strong wave of mana from the Rune Kingdom. He could not accurately recognize the identity of the owner, but it was obvious that the source was in the royal castle. Therefore, the young man asked the professor to personally go to the kingdom and check everything, since Esker himself was very busy preparing for the exams. However, the professor knew that it was impossible for a wizard to exist in that place, so it was difficult for him to believe what he heard. Mana is the source of all magic. She is the nourishing energy that comes from the tree at the center of the empire, and as everyone believes, its area of action does not cross the sea. Therefore, mana cannot exist on an island state, and a wizard there can come from nowhere. The Rune Kingdom was too far from the tree, and besides, it was completely surrounded by the sea. When the professor heard the information from the future student, he could not believe everything he said. The professor did not really believe the young man's words. Esker said that he agreed to enter the academy, so that the professor had to fulfill his small request. From that day on, the professor saw that the heart of the young gentleman, in whom winter always stood, had melted a little. The professor told Esker that, despite the fact that Isabel has a large amount of mana, this does not affect her in any way. The medka of mana is a phenomenon that represents a trace on the human body when it resonates with a tree. The most common effect is to change the color of your nails to blue. That's why most wizards have nails of such an unusual shade, but the girl doesn't have any blue nails or any marks. The young man looked at the professor and said that it was because she had red mana. The professor was shocked, since such a phenomenon had long disappeared. The professor knew that in any case, they needed to study such an unusual phenomenon. The professor asked Esker if his father knew. Esker looked at him and said that he didn't tell him anything. Professor Oz said that he would try to find some information himself, and asked the young man to do his homework while he searched for information. In the blink of an eye, Esker was transported to the young princess. He asked what she was doing. The girl said that she was looking for materials for a regent. The young man said with a smile that she needed to rest a little and not worry about the search. The professor looked out the window at the young people. He was very happy that the boy had a good friend. He was happy for him and wanted his heart to melt and not be wrapped in cold again. After all, it was winter for a long time. The professor hoped that spring would come to the boy's heart. Isabel was sitting in the library with her new friend. The black-haired girl was shocked, as young Isabel had collected a lot of books. Isabel said that she needed to make a magic regent by the end of next week. Recently, the girl came to the library almost every day and studied in order to maintain high academic performance. Thanks to this, she sometimes ran into Joy, who came to write scripts. Joy asked Isabel if she was having a hard time and if everything was okay with her. The princess said she was fine. Of course, it was difficult for her to get rid of Esker, since he constantly followed her and invited her to take a walk or to eat, and said that she still had plenty of time. Joy looked at her young friend and noticed that she looked very tired. She didn't understand what kind of object this was, after which she had to torture herself like that. Isabel said it was just applied magic. Joy was shocked. She knew that the subject was taught by Professor Oz. Isabel was at a loss and did not understand what was happening. Her reaction to what she heard was simply explosive. Suddenly, a young man approached them and said that it was not allowed to make noise in the library. He looked at Isabel and said that it looked like this was the student who wanted to join their club. Joy introduced Isabel and also introduced Kane, saying that he was also a member of the theater club and he was also Joy's childhood friend. Isabel knew that the young man came from an influential family of the Minister of the Empire. Joy asked her friend to stay with Isabel for a while, since she needed to interview one more candidate. Isabel was shocked. Joy reassured her and said that she would be back quickly. The young man looked at Isabel and said that, according to Joy, the girl is the first candidate that Joy wants to drag into the club herself. Isabel looked at the young man. He looked quite cold and harsh, but still it seemed to her that he was a good person. The girl felt as if she and Joy were complete opposites. The young man looked at the stack of books near Isabel, said that he and Joy took Professor Oz's class in their first year. Isabel was genuinely surprised that they were attending the professor's lectures. Since she heard that the item is not very popular, Kane knew that his friend Joy had an unrequited crush on Professor Oz. Esker watched as young Isabel collected ingredients for her project. He was very bored. The girl told him to wait a little longer, since she only had to find one ingredient. Kane told his friend Isabel a secret. He didn't understand why he told about such a secret thing to a student whom he was seeing for the first time in his life. Isabel did not want to interfere in the personal lives of other students. She asked the young man to help her in all seriousness. She asked which regent the two of them had chosen for the first task, since there were a lot of them, and she was still struggling with the choice. The young man was surprised and asked her if he understood correctly that she wanted to find out what regent they created. Isabel said that such information would help her make up her mind. The young man said that he made a transformation reagent that could change one's appearance for half a day, and his girlfriend created a pheromone regent. The regent made the opposite sex fall in love with the owner, and Joy called it a love potion. Young Isabel was in Sharaga. Because I knew that the transformation regent is considered very difficult to manufacture and is a high-class product. She did not understand how the young man managed to extend the duration of the effect, not by a couple of hours, but by half a day. Kane looked at her and said that she could share tips on making that were not in the book. Isabel was very pleased and happy with this offer. She sincerely thanked for such an offer, but the girl believed that it would be better if she did everything herself from the very beginning. She believed that if she relied too much on others, her personal progress would completely wither. The young man smiled and said that now he understood why Joy liked the girl so much. Young Isabel looked at her friend and said that she was very glad that she joined the theater club, because thanks to this, she was charged with a little help. Esker was at a loss. He was angry that she showed by all appearances that she did not care about him. He knew that some senior student from the theater club had helped her. He looked at her and said that it turned out that she had written on a piece of paper the advice that a senior student had given her. He wanted to see what was written there. He reached for the piece of paper. Isabel shouted that such behavior was unbecoming of a gentleman. She said there was no advice, and only her personal notes were written on the piece of paper, so she wouldn't want to show them. Isabel noticed that her friend was very stubborn. She asked what regent he chose. Esker looked at her and said that he would rather join the theater club than perform such a stupid task. Isabel understood that Esker did not pay the slightest attention to what did not interest him. However, she considered him a very kind and caring friend, and she would very much like to attend the academy with him in the future. However, if this continues, he may be expelled. Isabel looked at him and said that even if she asked, he would not have joined the theater club. She really wanted them to study together in the future. She didn't know what she could do for him. The prince approached them. He was shocked by what he heard, because I didn't expect Isabel to join the theater club. Isabel noticed that something was wrong with him and asked by chance if he had cut himself. Cross said he was fine and had just recently joined the craft club. Esker looked at the prince and asked why he came to them. The prince hesitated a little, since he only came to them because he heard Isabel's voice. He said he came to do his homework. Isabel was very happy and said that they could do it together. Esker was not in the mood to deal with them. He said that if they really wanted to, they could do the task together. Isabel decided to cheat because she did not want the young man to fail and be kicked out. She said that she would owe one wish to whoever got the highest score in their task, but everything should be within reason. The prince looked at her and said with a smile that he was thinking that he needed to practice in other areas besides fencing, but such an offer was very tempting for him. Esker looked at his friend and said that these were quite interesting proposals, and he also agreed. Seeing their reaction, Isabel thought that she would soon regret such an offer. Kane came to Joy and said that her script yesterday was very good, and he also said that he had brought some snacks. Joy was very happy because she was a little hungry. The young man asked his friend how her interview went yesterday. Joy said that another person came to her and decided to join only because of him. The young man apologized. Joy said that he had no need to apologize and asked what he and Isabel talked about yesterday, since she left the two of them. The young woman said that Professor Oz gave them the same task with regents that they had once done, and they talked about it all the time. Joy realized that Isabel would be making a transformation regent. She was sure that her friend had given her some advice. Kane said that he offered to give Isabel some advice, but she replied that she wanted to carry out her assignment herself. Joy said with a smile that the girl easily showed honest and correct traits. In fact, Joy liked her character and behavior. The young man said that the girl showed interest in the love potion that Joy once made. Joy was shocked by what she heard. The father brought his son to meet the prince. The young boy hesitated. The prince looked at him and said that shyness is not a sin, and extended his hand to him and introduced himself. The prince said with a smile that Mr. Delph had told him a lot about him, and he was very glad to meet him. Esker looked at the young prince with contempt and said that he did not like liars like the prince. The prince was shocked by this statement. Esker sat on a tree and thought about everything. He knew that his next lesson was practical magic, so he could take a little nap. The prince approached the tree on which the young man was lying and said that he knew that he was not sleeping, so that he asked him to come down for a while. Esker did not understand why the prince was not in class. Chris said there was a break now so they could talk. The prince looked at his friend and said that he was aware that he did not care about classes, but he did not understand why. He did not know the bell schedule. Esker was not in the mood to listen to the prince's lectures and told him to quickly say why he came, since he had to observe the afternoon nap time. The prince knew that such disrespectful attitude towards him had existed since childhood, and he hasn't changed a bit after all this time. Chris knew that he just had to endure, because if someone else had been in the place of the young man, he would have been taken into custody long ago. But if Esker is standing in front of him, then it's a completely different matter. The prince and Esker have been close friends since childhood. Thanks to the long friendship of their fathers, he did not really want to quarrel and blame a friend whom he had known for a long time. In addition, Esker is a member of the Tower of Magicians, so it would simply be unwise to treat it carelessly. After all, only the wizards with whom they participated in every war gather in the Tower of Magicians. The Tower Mages contributed greatly,